Hey, what's up? Zach D Productions here, and I'm here for a video topic for you guys, a discussion video. This is actually one that I've been wanting to talk about for some time now, but I wasn't exactly sure how to go about it. But I wanted to talk about this regardless because I know that I've briefly brought up this subject before in live streams maybe, and maybe to some of you who I've talked to on this platform that I've met, that I am now close to and that I'm now friends with and everything. But I wanted to just sit down and make a video talking about this and basically going over all of this. And the topic is why I didn't get into metal till much later in life. Now, for those of you who didn't know, I didn't get into metal till I was about 18 years old, which, if you didn't know that already, I'm sure that that's a shock to some of you, because usually when people first get into metal, it's usually much earlier in life. You know, some people even say that they were into metal since they were like 5, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that maybe because their parents were into metal, but I never had parents that were into metal, so yeah, I mean, that should tell you all that you need to know as far as why I didn't get into metal much sooner. But yeah, I never really had that. I was never really raised in to listen to metal or, anything like that. But it's something that I grew to have a liking towards, obviously. Now, before I was 18, I was always into music, at least to some extent, even if it was just a few artists. Like, obviously, I've said before that Breaking Benjamin was basically the first band I ever got into, at least I would say so. And I was basically into that sort of scene of music. Like, I was into Breaking Benjamin, I was into 3 Days Grace and Red, basically the whole modern rock, post-grunge scene, you could say. I was mainly into that type of music, really heavily into that type of music, which I still do like some of that stuff, not as much as I used to, but at least to some extent I still do like some of that stuff. So yeah, I would say I became a Breaking Benjamin fan when I was 15. So 15 was when I basically got into my first band. But yeah, but I wouldn't really consider bands like Breaking Benjamin and 3 Days Grace or Red metal. Now, I think as far as the rock genre goes, they're pretty heavy for rock bands, I would say. I think we can all agree with that. They're pretty heavy for rock music. And when I was 18, I got into metalcore music. And there's a lot of cheering and clapping going on over there. There's some sort of special occasion going on over there. I'm not sure what's going on, but there is actually a park up the road here. So yeah, something must be going on there. But yeah, I did get into metalcore though. That was my introduction to metal, and I'm sure that's what a lot of people started with. And metalcore is an easy genre to get into if you're already into post-grunge and that modern rock scene. So me taking the leap on over to metal when it comes to metalcore wasn't really that big of a leap, of course, because, the bands that I did get into, I would always consider Demon Hunter and Dead by April the first metal bands I ever got into. Now, I always say Demon Hunter's the first because I usually don't like to admit that Dead by April was my first because, well, let's be real, they're not exactly the most metal thing out there. But obviously these bands are not that much heavier than your typical post-grunge modern rock bands. So again, the leap wasn't really that massive. So I did want to go over why I didn't get into metal till much later, till I turned 18. And some of you also asked me, like, what was I doing before then? Like, before I got into music or listened to music? Like, what was I doing before then? I mean, there's other hobbies and other forms of entertainment besides music, guys. Before then, I was heavily into gaming. I mean, I'm not really as big into gaming as I used to be. I still do like video games, but I mostly stick with older video games, to be honest. I could really care less about the modern gaming, to be perfectly honest with you guys. I really could care less about any of the new games coming out and things like that. no offense to you who do like a lot of the new games. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a preference thing. That's all. Another video for another day, though. So yeah, I mean, I was just busy with other stuff. I wasn't really worried about music, but I do want to go over a few reasons why I didn't get into metal in particular till I was 18, and why I didn't really get into much music till later. So one of the reasons is basically I just didn't know where to start. Like, I was familiar with metal, like I knew what metal was, like even when I was younger, before like really heavily getting into it, but I just didn't know where to start. Like, I knew about bands like Korn, I knew about bands like Slipknot, I knew about bands like Disturbed, and a lot of new metal, I know. And I even knew of bands like Metallica. So yeah, obviously, because who hasn't heard of Metallica, right? So, I knew about these bands, but I just wasn't exactly sure where to start. And I wasn't sure what I was going to like, So that was definitely something that played a factor, because, there was a lot of bands that I could have explored, but again, I just didn't know where to start. I could have started out with one of those bands, because I know that the bands that I just mentioned, a lot of people name as their first metal bands, their introduction to metal. I know that a lot of people start off with new metal and even some thrash like Metallica. So yeah, I mean, that's just how it goes. And I think another reason is assumptions. Like, I just would assume that I wouldn't like these bands, like, if I listened to them, because, I think we all know this at this point. I think we all know that sometimes metal does get misjudged, or, there's a lot of assumptions that come with metal, or, like the saying goes, you don't like what you don't understand. And I think that was the problem with me. Like, I just wasn't sure, like, what I was going to like, and I just wasn't sure if I was going to like a lot of these bands. And I just assumed that I wouldn't like bands like Metallica or Korn or whoever, Now, I do like those bands a lot now. I mean, obviously, I've grown tremendously in my metal journey. I've moved on from just metalcore to thrash to new metal to prog metal. You know how it goes. I've definitely had a lot of growth in my metal journey since I first got into it, of course. But anyhow, earlier in life, I just never really had that much interest. I never really had that much interest in those bands. And I just assumed I wouldn't like them because, of a samey factor or whatever. I don't know. Because you do have to understand as well that I mostly preferred music that mostly contained melody. Like, if a band didn't contain a crap ton of melody, I basically wanted nothing to do with it. And I think that's why I stuck with post-grunge and modern rock for as long as I did, because a lot of that is obviously very melodic, very emotional as well, and that's the type of stuff that I've always preferred. I just thought that there wasn't going to be that much emotion to a lot of these metal bands. And I've learned that, it's not just about that, and it doesn't just have to be about that. Now, there's nothing wrong with, emotion and melody, because I'll be honest, I'm still like that to this day. I still love a good song with some emotion and melody, but, it's not like I just stick with that type of music, though. Like, I can listen to some thrash, obviously. There's quite a few thrash bands that I dig quite a bit, There's a few death metal bands that I like, so there you go. So obviously you can't tell me that there hasn't been growth, right? With these subgenres that contain little to no melody, you could say. So there is that. But the assumption thing is definitely a big problem. Some people just assume that they won't like these bands, and I was that way myself, just saying. I mean, again, not knowing where to start, and the assumption that I just won't like some of these bands. And also, I was also the type of person that didn't want to be involved in the mainstream. Now, for as long as I can remember, I've always been a lone wolf, you could say. I've always been a lonely guy. I don't know. That's just how I've been. Even when I was younger, that's how I always was. I mean, I prefer to spend most of my time alone. That's just me personally. I don't know why that is, but that's just how it always was for me, again, even when I was younger. So, and I knew that a lot of people like these bands, again, like Slipknot and Korn and all these other types of bands that are very big in the scene. And I guess I just didn't want to be involved in that. Like, I didn't want to be a part of any community or anything. And that's why I started out with bands that either not many people know about or bands that most people don't care about. You know what I mean? And, I still like those bands as well, but you know how it goes. I mean, that's just how I prefer things. I just wanted to stick to my own thing. Like, I wanted to just go my own way, if you know what I mean. That's just how I always was. I mean, obviously I've opened up my mind since then, but that's just how I rolled back then. So another reason, another big reason for sure, is, well, for those who didn't know, I grew up in church. Now, I could just stop the video right there because you guys already know that, if you are someone who has grew up in that type of environment, being into metal could really go into any direction. It can go in many different directions. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with being in church and growing up in church. That's not what I'm implying here, but there is some stereotypes. Again, going back to the assumption thing, like some people like within the church hold might see like metal and see it as evil or satanic or demonic or whatever, which, I think that's one of the reasons why I just didn't bother with it back then, because like, even if I did find a metal band when I was really young that I did like, I would probably have to worry quite a bit that, there would be a lot of monitoring, if you know what I mean. It's something that I would have to worry about, because, yeah, unfortunately, a lot of metal is seen as demonic and evil or whatever, And again, I never had parents who grew up with it, so, you put it all together, it makes sense. It just makes sense to why I didn't really get involved in it in the first place. And I look at a lot of the bands that I'm into now, and I just think, like, with a lot of these bands, like, have gotten a pass if I got into them when I was younger. I mean, a lot of them probably would have been questioned when I was younger, like, even upon just based on cover art and album art and stuff, like, because some people even judge music based on album art, which is bizarre to me. Now, I do think that the album art should indicate or replicate or, whatever. It should embody, like, what the music is. I think that's important, like, you should be able to, like, know that an album is rap, for example, based on the cover. And you should know that an album is metal based on the cover. So, yeah, there's just a lot of things about that, with the whole strict issue, when it comes to growing up in church and, being in that sort of household or whatever, which, again, there's nothing wrong with that unless, there's legalism involved, which unfortunately is one of the factors that kept me from checking out metal to begin with. And look, just because I said I didn't get into metal till I turned 18, I wouldn't say that was inherently because, like, 18 is the legal adult age or whatever, and I could do what I want, because even then, it was questionable that I could do whatever I want, but it had nothing to do with that. Like, it had nothing to do with, the age to why I got into metal when I did. It just happened when it did, that's all. I remember it was my senior year of high school, so there you go. I mean, that's just how it was for me. I mean, most of it just had to do with a lack of interest. It had to do with a lack of interest. I mostly stuck with a few bands because I believe that that's all that I needed. That's all that I needed. And before then, I just listened to what everyone else listened to. That's how I rolled then. But either way, that's basically my story. That's basically my reasoning, I guess. It's to why I never got into metal till I was about 18, but I was into rock even sooner than that, of course, like I said. So let me know what you think. When did you get into metal at first, and what did you think of this video? So feel free to let me know. So I hope this answers that question for those of you who may have been wondering that. So feel free to let me know what you think, though. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.